But then after World War II, West Germany had to pay like $7 billion
That's a bar. That's a bar.
to the state of Israel because of the Jews that were persecuted.
Again, I'm sorry for the
And paying out to the other Jews of the Holocaust as well. Hello once again to Chatterbox. You know, we would not be here without you. So we continue to thank you for subscribing and requesting. Keep supporting us by doing what you're doing and more if you can. A few weeks ago, a dedicated subscriber asked about our thoughts around Dr. Shashi addressing the Oxford Union in the discussion pertaining to whether Great Britain owed India reparation. As you know, the House was in overwhelming agreement with the statement. In the new style of Chatterbox, we will be responding to some of what is being said, or what was said, what will be said, and whether there's been any change since that discussion was first had. We all have heard of Dr. Shashi Tharoor, who is a renowned author, politician, and former international civil servant. His life spans over a vast spectrum of experiences, and it would take hours to name some of his achievements. But Dr. Shashi is that individual whose life should be turned into a documentary-style motion picture that during his nearly 3-decade-long prior career at the United Nations, he served as a peacekeeper, a refugee worker, administrator at the highest levels. So this is quite an extensive CV and fascinating life thus far. Taking into consideration, he was born in London in 1956, educated in India and United States. He completed a PhD in 1978 at the Fletcher School of Law and diplomacy at Tufts University. There's much more to say about this renowned individual, but today is back to the focus on the riveting speech around the Oxford Union reparation debate, where the House once again believed that Britain owed reparation to her former colonies. So let's just jump into this and see what everybody else is thinking about it.
Madam President, and gentlemen, ladies of the House, standing here with 8 minutes in my hands and at this venerable and rather magnificent institution, I was going to assure you that I belong to the Henry VIII School of Public Speaking. That as Henry VIII said to his wives, I shall not keep you long. But now finding myself the 7th speaker out of 8 in what must already seem a rather long evening to you, I rather feel like Henry VIII's last wife. I more or less know what's expected of me, but I'm not sure how to do it any differently. Perhaps what I should do is really try and pay attention to the arguments that were advanced by the opposition today. We had, for example, Sir Richard Ottaway challenging the very idea that it could be argued that the economic situation of the colonies was actually worsened by the experience of British colonialism. Well, I stand to offer you the Indian example, Sir Richard. India's share of the world economy when Britain arrived on its shores was 23%. By the time the British left, it was down to below 4%. Why? Simply because India had been governed for the benefit of Britain. Britain's rise for 200 years was financed by its depredations in India. In fact, Britain's industrial revolution was actually premised upon the deindustrialization of India. The handloom weavers, for example, famed across the world, whose products were exported around the world, Britain came right in. There were actually these weavers making fine muslin, light as woven air, it was said. And Britain came right in, smashed their thumbs, broke their looms, imposed tariffs and duties on their cloth and products, and started, of course, taking the raw materials from India and shipping back manufactured cloth, flooding the world's markets with what became the products of the dark and satanic mills of Victorian England. That meant that the weavers in India became beggars, and India went from being a world-famous exporter of finished cloth into an importer.
How could that possibly happen?
27% of world trade
Was there
to,
no
to less than
retaliation?
2%. Meanwhile, colonialists
You know, we're
like
only
Robert
really having this
Clive
discussion because people don't want
bought
to
their
take
rotten
responsibility
boroughs in
for
England on the
things that happened
proceeds of
before.
their loot in
They
India,
think that
while
we're
taking
blaming
the
them,
Hindi word
the
loot
generation now.
into
We're
their
like, it's not your
dictionaries
fault. We're
as
saying,
well as their
make it
habits.
right. That's what we're saying. We're not saying you've done something bad and you should be punished. No, we're saying, make it right.
And the British had the gall to call him Clive of India, as if he belonged to the country, when all he really did was to ensure that much of the country belonged to him. By the end of the 19th century, the fact is that India was already Britain's biggest cash cow, the world's biggest purchaser of British goods and exports, and the source of highly paid employment for British civil servants. We literally paid for our own oppression. And as has been pointed out, the wealthy Victorian British families that made their money out of the slave economy, 1/5 of the elites of the wealthy class in Britain in the 19th century owed their money to transporting 3 million Africans across the waters. And in fact, in 1833, when slavery was abolished, what happened was that a compensation of 20 million pounds was paid.
Exactly.
Not as reparations
Exactly.
to those who had lost their lives or who had suffered or been oppressed by slavery, but to those who had lost their property. I was struck by the fact that the
And that has that
Wi-Fi
password
password
change.
of
You know what it is?
commemorates
It's a constant
Mr.
reminder
Gladstone, the great liberal
that
hero. Well, I'm sorry,
they
his
are
family
still
was
in
one of those
power.
who benefited
Yeah.
from
and
the
we
police
are
compensation.
powerless. It's a
Staying
constant
with India,
reminder.
between 15 and 29 million Indians died of starvation in British-induced famines. The most famous example, of course, was the Great Bengal Famine during the Second World War, when 4 million people died because Winston Churchill deliberately, as
And
a
he's seen
matter
as a
of
great hero,
militant policy,
He is. They got so
proceeded
mad
to
about that
divert
statue, innit?
essential supplies from civilians in Bengal to sturdy Tommies and Europeans as reserve stockpiles. He said that the starvation of anyway underfed Bengalis mattered much less than that of sturdy Greeks. This is Churchill's actual quote. And when conscience-stricken British officials wrote to him, pointing out that people were dying because of this decision, he peevishly wrote in the margins of the file, "Why hasn't Gandhi died yet?" So all notions that the British were trying to do their colonial enterprise out of enlightened despotism, to try and bring the benefits of colonialism and civilization to the benighted heathen. I'm sorry, Churchill's conduct in 43, simply one example of many that gave a lie to this myth. As others have said on the proposition, violence and racism were the reality of the colonial experience. And no wonder that the sun never set on the British Empire, because even God couldn't trust the English in the dark.
But then after World War II,
Let me
West
take
Germany had
World
to
War
pay
I as a very
$7
concrete
billion.
example. The first
That's a
speaker,
bar.
Mr.
That's a
Lee,
bar.
To the
suggested
state
these
of
things
Israel.
wouldn't be quantified.
Yeah.
Because
Well,
of the
let me
Jews that were
quantify World War
persecuted.
I for you. Again, I'm sorry, from an Indian
And
perspective,
paying out to
others
the
have
other
spoken
Jews
about
of the Holocaust as well.
1/6 of all the British forces that fought in the war were Indian. 54,000 Indians actually lost their lives in that war. 65,000 were wounded. Another 4,000 remained missing or in prison. Indian taxpayers had to cough up £100 million in that time's money. India supplied 70 million rounds of ammunition, 600,000 rifles and machine guns, 42 million garments were stitched and sent out.
And this
to
information
India,
is never really
and
disclosed.
1.3 million Indian personnel served in this war.
have to really
I know
dig
all
for
this
it.
because, of course, the commemoration of the centenary has just taken place. But not just that, India had to supply 173,000 animals, 370 million tons of supplies, and in the end, the total value of everything that was taken out of India. India, by the way, suffering from recession at that time and poverty and hunger, was, in today's money, £8 billion. You want quantification? It's available. Second World War, it was even worse, 2.5 million Indians in uniform. I won't belabor the point, but of Britain's total war debt of £3 billion, in 1945 money, 1.25
But Germany had to pay
owed
to
India
France
and never
and
actually
Britain.
paid. Somebody mentioned Scotland.
Come on.
Well,
Why
that
is it for one
that
and not for the
colonialism
other?
actually cemented your union with Scotland. You know, the Scots
It's the
had actually
value that is
tried to
given
send
on certain people's
colonies
lives.
before 1707. They'd all failed, I'm sorry to say. But then,
Well,
of
they
course,
gave the
came
Jews a lot of
India,
value.
and India was available, and
In
there you
comparison
had
to the slaves.
a disproportionate employment of Scots. I'm sorry, Mr. Mackenzie has to speak after me. Engaged in this colonial enterprise as soldiers, as merchants, as agents, as employees, and the earnings from India is what brought prosperity to Scotland, even pulled Scotland out of poverty. Now that India is no longer there, no wonder the bonds are loosening. Now, we've heard other arguments on this side. There's been a mention of the railways. Well, let me tell you, first of all, as my colleague, the Jamaican High Commissioner, has pointed out, railways and roads were really built to serve British interests and not those of the local people. But I might add that many countries have built railways and roads without having had to be colonized in order to do so.
See, there you go.
They were designed to carry raw materials from the hinterland into the ports to be shipped to Britain.
English language.
And the fact is that the Indian or Jamaican or other colonial public, their needs were incidental. Transportation, there was no attempt made to match supply to demand for mass transport, none whatsoever. Instead, in fact, the Indian railways were built with massive incentives offered by Britain to British investors, guaranteed out of Indian taxes paid by Indians, with the result that you actually had 1 mile of Indian railway costing twice what it cost to build the same mile in Canada or Australia, because there was so much money being paid in extravagant returns.
And that still
Britain
goes
made all
on
the
today
profits,
in modern
all the
society.
technology, supplied
You
all
can't
the equipment,
deny the strategy.
and
You
absolutely
cannot
all these
deny
benefits
the
came
strategy.
as private
Why do you think it was
enterprise.
called Great
British
Britain?
private enterprise.
You cannot
at
deny the
public
strategy.
risk.
People try and deny
Everybody
it.
else made Britain
That
great.
was the railways
Well,
as an
made Britain great.
accomplishment.
I can't
We're
even say
hearing
the
about
word.
aid.
Everybody made
I think it was
Britain
it was
great.
again Sir Richard Ottaway who mentioned British
They
aid
just
to India.
take,
Well, let me just point out that
and
British
then
aid to India is about 0.4% of India's GDP. The government of India actually spends more on fertilizer subsidies, which might be an appropriate metaphor for that argument.
He's killing.
If I may point out as well,
He's killing it. He's killing it. You know what I mean?
He's killing. He's killing. He's doing very, very well.
if I may point out as well that that as my fellow speakers from the proposition have pointed out, there have been incidents of racial violence, of loot, of massacres, of bloodshed, of transportation, in India's case, even of one of our last Mughal emperor. Yes, maybe today's Britons are not responsible for some of these depredations, but the same speakers have pointed with pride to their foreign aid. You're not responsible for the people starving in Somalia, but you give them aid. Surely the principle of reparations for the wrongs that have been done cannot be denied. It's been pointed out, for example, the dehumanization of Africans in the Caribbean, the massive psychological damage that has been done, the undermining of social traditions, of property rights, of the authority structures of these societies, all in the interests of British colonialism. And the fact remains that many of today's problems in these countries, including the persistence, in some cases the creation of racial and ethnic and religious tensions, were the direct result of the colonial experience.
I will
so
say
there
it's
is
nice
a
that
moral
people
debt
have taken time
that
to
needs
learn.
to be paid.
Because
Someone challenged
you asked me certain
reparations
things
elsewhere.
about
Well, I'm sorry, Germany
like
doesn't
3 years
just
ago.
give
It wasn't
reparations
as much as
to
after
Israel.
BLM.
It
Because I
also
got
gave
edu-
reparations to
Do you know what I
Poland.
mean?
Perhaps
So
some of the
it's
speakers
nice.
here are too young
Everyone's getting
to
educated.
remember the dramatic picture of Chancellor Willy Brandt on his knees in the Warsaw Ghetto in 1970. And there are other examples. There is Italy's reparations to Libya. There's Japan's to Korea. Even Britain has paid reparations to the New Zealand Maoris. So it's not as if this is something
Why did he do that?
unprecedented or unheard of that's going to somehow
I
open
need
some
to
sort of
research
nasty
on that.
Pandora's box.
You can type that in the
No
comments.
wonder
It'd be
Professor
great.
Lewis reminded us that he's from Texas. There's a wonderful expression in Texas that summarizes the arguments of the opposition: all hat and no cattle.
Hee-haw! Yeah,
Now-
that's what it's about.
If I can just quickly look through the other notes I was scribbling while they were speaking. There was reference to democracy and rule of law. Let me say with the greatest possible respect, it's a bit rich to oppress, enslave, kill, torture, maim people for 200 years and then celebrate the fact that they're democratic at the end of it.
They strip everything from you. They strip you down. and then say, actually, you can go on and do as you wish.
Yeah.
We allow you now.
We were denied democracy, sir. We had to snatch it, seize it from you. With the greatest reluctance, it was conceded in India's case after 150 years of British rule, and that too with limited franchise. Yes, indeed, ma'am.
The opposition spoke quite highly of Greek and Athenian democracy on which the West should pride itself, and spoke of liberty and equality in that same name. The Athenian democracy was only functioning because of the slave society on which it was built. That's the nature of colonisation.
All right, I don't think that needs contradiction, not from me at any rate. But if I may just point out, I think the arguments made by a couple of the speakers, the first speaker, Mr. Lee in particular, conceded all the evil atrocities of colonialism, but essentially suggested that reparations won't really help. They won't help the right people. They'll be used as a propaganda tool. They'll embolden people like Mr. Mugabe. It's always nice how in the old days, you know, I'm sorry to say that the people of the Caribbean used to frighten their children into behaving and sleeping by saying Sir Francis Drake would come after them. That was a legacy of that. Now it's Mugabe will be there. So this is the new sort of Sir Francis Drake of our times. The fact is very simply, sir, that we are not talking about reparations as a tool to empower anybody. They're a tool for you to atone for the wrongs that have been done.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And reparations is not just about money. It's also about bettering countries, bettering communities, bettering people.
Better infrastructure.
Schools, exactly.
On the kinds of horrors people have suffered. Certainly no amount of money can expiate the loss of a loved one, as somebody pointed out there. You're not going to be able to figure out an exact amount. But the principle is what matters. The fact is that to speak blithely of sacrifices on both sides, as an analogy was used here, a burglar comes into your house, ransacks the place, stubs his toe, and you say, well, there was a sacrifice on both sides. That, I'm sorry to say, is not an acceptable, argument. The truth is that we are not arguing specifically that vast sums of money need to be paid. The proposition before this House is the principle of owing reparations, not the fine points of how much is owed, to whom it should be paid. The question is there a debt? Does Britain owe reparations? As far as I'm concerned,
100%.
the ability to acknowledge a wrong that has been done, to simply say sorry, will go a far, far, far longer way than some percentage of GDP in the form of aid. What is required, it seems to me, is accepting the principle that reparations are owed. Personally, I'd be quite happy if it was £1 a year for the next 200 years after the last 200 years of Britain and India.
But ultimately, what would that do? What would that do? Eloquent speaker. You know, there's speakers, you hear them, and high in society, and they're speaking monotones and bore you to death. You know, Dr. Shashi, I love the way he speaks. I can listen to him over and over and over again. And it's just so eloquent, so wonderful. You know, he could read me a bedtime story and I'll be happy as well. And I listen to his speeches just before I'm going to bed. And it just fills you with so much respect and love for what it is that he has been doing and what it is he continues to do as well. And the thing that he's bringing it to our attention. I mean, this was filmed like in 2015, and it still paints such a powerful picture now. And only now things are beginning to change. Things are being recognized. I mean, look what happened in Bristol in relation to the statue just being torn down. And this was all because of the Black Lives Matter. And this is because of the slave trade as well. And so now it's having that ripple effect. I mean, look how long it's taken. Look how long we've been talking about reparation. And like I said, even Barack Obama, when he was in 2008, he wasn't in favor as such of reparation because there was lots of talk about money. But now, it actually is this year, he did an interview with the NAACP, and he was asked again, And he says, yes, he is in favor of reparations because America must pay for what it is that they did. And reparation doesn't have to be about money. And like you guys said, there's so much that you can do to help people move forward.
I will say, because I just remembered that when Barack Obama said that, and I must admit that there was a little bit of me that slightly agreed with them, only because at the time I was seeing the culture of Black America culture is different to Black British culture. It's very different, very different. And the memes that was coming out with people saying about getting their reparation, it was they were going to invest it and buy whatever they wanted to buy. It was exactly the same stupidness that.
So you're talking about it was going to individuals as opposed to and that's the difference.
Yeah, my problem was I was saying I don't think the reparations should go to the generation of now. I think like what you were saying, it should be to make institutions. Individuals shouldn't get the money. It should be going to youth clubs, to schools, to different things to actually like bring up. I think that's what I had more of a favor of doing than people getting a check. And not because my thing was, I was like, I have to think about it from my point of view. If it was my grandma that was on the Windrush, it was my grandma who went through all of that, and I got paid. I've not gone through anything. I get it that my family has, but me as an individual, I just got a lot of money, which is great, and I love it. But it defeats the purpose for me. I think they should have been. Do you know what I mean?
I think reparations should go into kind of establishing universities, building schools, kind of infrastructure within a society to kind of so the next generation can kind of rebuild what has been lost.
Yes.
And that is what they need to think of. So it's not like you open your bank account and say, hey, I've got £2,000 or £3,000. I'm going to go out and just spend it on Nike, or I'm just going to buy the latest movies or cameras. It's just something to help push your people and your generation forward.
I think definitely. I agree with everything you guys said there. You pretty much covered everything that I was thinking the whole time watching that speech. But for me, I mean, he's a great talker, isn't he? It was great hearing him do this speech. Had so much gems in there, so much knowledge. Things that you can take away from that, learn things that you didn't know, some of the numbers he was putting out there. Do you know what I mean? The percentage of, the position that India was in as to how much the country was worth in regard to before Britain actually arrived in India. Well, should I say arrived or invaded, or whatever the right term is to use to express how bad the British had an impact on India and their economy. But for me, I think this type of thing should be definitely pushed a lot more in the media and pushed a lot more online to young people, so that people are aware of some of the things that have happened in the past that have impacted, certain countries and put them in the state that they're in now. So as you guys said there, definitely agree. We shouldn't just be giving out money to individuals, but definitely putting that infrastructure in place so that we can allow the future generation to have those equal opportunities that was, taken away from them with some of the wrongs that was done by Britain in the past. So sitting there, keeping your mouth shut, not saying anything about it, and just thinking, oh, well, it wasn't me, it was my great-great-granddad or whatever it is. To me, that's not the answer or the solution to the problem. We need more active people in positions of power in countries like Britain and America that are going to actually do something about it and make sure that, there is some help given to some of the countries that were taken advantage of in the past.
But the thing is, this continues to happen because people are still being exploited in throughout the world, even in this day and age. I mean, look at Coca-Cola. They got planted in India, and it was killing off the land. It was killing off what it is that they had created and putting thousands of farmers out of work, draining water from the wells and everything else as well. And this is Coca-Cola in this day and age. There was a massive petition to get it closed down. I'm not too sure if it's been closed down as yet, but it's a huge thing. Look at the sweatshops in China as well. Who's making the money from it all the time?
But I will say that with Dr. Sashi, he's got a really hard job, because I find growing up, I feel like I was one of the slightly privileged black guys, because I felt like they allowed me to be popular. They allowed me to come through because of entertainment reasons. You know, I still faced racism, but I still had a lot more support or popularity. I would hear a lot of things from not just white and Indian, I must say, families where they were like, "Oh, you're the nice Jamaican. You're a nice one out of them. You're a nice one." And I think that with Dr. Sashi, because he's got the gift of the gab and he's got comedy when he speaks, my worry is it gets him on the table, but they still don't take him seriously. Because I still think that the first joke he made when he was talking about Henry VIII, I took that as two things. I took that as, yes, it was a joke, but it also was a slight dig at the royal family. Your country was owned by a guy who went through women very publicly and killed them. He was the mark of misogyny, you know? And this is your Great Britain that you're celebrating. So I don't know if it's almost like in black films where we talk about the ghetto, when we talk about drugs being put into the ghetto by the FBI and stuff, or we just talk about the struggle in general. And because it's in a comedic way, they laugh, but they don't really get that, no, it's wrong. And I feel like the best thing for Dr. Sashi right now is the popularity. That's the thing that will push people to listening to him. Because when you look around that room, you see the first row, and the first row are smiling and nodding, but they are definitely not on board with what he's saying. And then you've got the younger crowd who are like cheering and screaming because they know, and they're of that generation. So I think that the best thing to come out of this is more people ask for Dr. Sashi. The best thing to come out of this is he ignites more people to talk about these situations, and under peer pressure, they have to move. Because him saying what he's saying, I don't know if that's the thing that's going to make them go, we need to look at this. And it's nothing wrong with what he's saying. It's nothing wrong with how he's saying it. It's just that I think from what I know about the system will allow you to entertain them, but they don't want to face the ugly truth. They only face the ugly truth when they look ugly. And the only way to make them look ugly is when everybody is against them. That's my 2 cents.
Mm-hmm. That was more than 2 cents. That was like $100 worth, man, or £100, or dare I say how many rupees. But nonetheless, this was quite a riveting conversation. It started with an intellect, and it ended with an intellect as well. And I'm talking about the intellect being Doug's, because, hey, he is an actor. Ultimately, this has been Chatterbox. We hope that you enjoyed what it is that we had to say. I mean, Dr. Sashi, we owe him a debt of gratitude. And yes, you are right, because we need to hear more about him. We need him just coming into schools and talking to our young ones and inspiring those young individuals as well.
Yes.
But we could also do the same, because it's not just about Dr. Sashi. It's about people who we believe that we owe a debt of gratitude to. So, you know, open up our history books again, and let's take this one step forward. Let's be the movement behind this revolution that's growing, that's taking up space, because it's the younger generation that's out there gonna have to feel what it is that we've experienced. And they're not taking anything for granted now. They're just coming out fighting. But they have to fight for what's right, what they believe in, and the positivity. And let's change the narrative. Yeah? Change the narrative, and let's all prosper together. This has been Chatterbox. And look, I even forgot to introduce everybody, but by now, you know who we are. Peace.